want your soul.
No. No, I don't have the source for the movies. And before you ask, it's not mainstream porn you can find by just Googling my name. They're videos of me being murdered. Where would you even find those types of videos? Dark web, maybe? I couldn't say. I don't like watching myself being murdered. What I can tell you is I've starred in over 50, and according to the guy that distributes them, I'm the most watched and most sought after snuff star in history, if that's even a thing. You're probably wondering how one would even get into that business. Well, the short answer is by accident. You don't wake up one day and decide you want to be murdered. In my case, I answered an ad looking for an amateur porn actress. I was just starting in the business and the pay seemed rather reasonable. When I arrived at the location, which was a house in an upmarket neighborhood, it didn't raise any red flags. It all seemed legit until I asked to be paid up front, and the response was, "Let's see how you die first." Before I knew it, I was being held down and the cameras began rolling. All I can say is dying is like going to sleep during surgery. It's painful. And at the start, it's scary. But when your heart starts slowing down, you get a rush of euphoria before everything goes silent, right before the lights go out. I couldn't tell if there was an afterlife. I don't stay dead long enough to find out. It's like going to sleep without dreaming. There's a nanosecond of darkness right before you wake up again. You would think that a guy whose business is death could easily be scared. But when I suddenly woke up as they were loading me into a shallow grave in the woods, he screamed like a little girl. It took some time to calm him down. You would swear it was him that was just brutally murdered with the way he reacted. But once the initial shock wore off, he looked me dead in the eye, no pun intended, and said, "I'm going to make you a fucking star." Now, I can't go into the details on how I get snuffed out, but I can say that the money is fantastic. More than I could ever make being in mainstream porn, that's for sure. The problem isn't the fact that my employer is a death dealer of women. Actually, no women have been murdered apart from me, of course, since I started. The problem is the reactions I'm starting to get the more my popularity grows. The surprising thing is the people who notice me are the most ordinary people you could imagine, not monsters that hide away in the shadows, fantasizing about murdering women. I mean, people like school teachers, doctors, even young teenagers. The biggest shock for me was when I was sitting in a cafe and I was approached by a young dad who had his 2 young daughters with him. He sat staring at me while his daughters sat eating chocolate muffins. I knew why he was looking at me, even if he didn't. As I was finishing up my latte, I looked up to see him standing next to me, with a strange grin on his face. "Hey there. Do we know each other? Do I know you from somewhere?" he suddenly asked. I was in my comfort clothes, a baggy t-shirt with a pair of sweatpants, and the tattoo of a pentagram on my arm was on show. He began studying me to figure out how he knew, and when I was just about to speak, he noticed the tattoo on my arm. It was like a light switch on his brain, and he suddenly realized where he knew me from. His face turned deathly pale and he began to stutter a bit before he hurried himself and his daughters out of the cafe. I was never really worried about being noticed before, because the men that watched me expected me to be dead. I also never gave a second thought about my tattoo being the thing that gave me away. I mean, how many girls out there have the same tattoo? When I got it done, I was told it was a popular choice. That all changed when I got a phone call from my mother, though. My poor mother had no clue about the type of business I was in. She always thought I was into some lifestyle stuff, like a trainer to the stars or something. I think the dream was better than the reality, and always told her friends I was a successful businesswoman of some sort. Technically, she wasn't wrong. All that changed when she rang me in hysterics. She could barely contain herself over the phone. "You're alive. Oh God, you're alive." She just kept repeating that down the phone. After I calmed her down and reassured her I was very much alive, I waited until her breathing had slowed to a more relaxed state. "Allison, oh, for a moment I thought I was speaking to a ghost." My mother was always my biggest fan in life, and it broke my heart to hear her this upset. "The police were here. Men in suits, detectives, I think they may have been. They told me you were dead. Oh, my sweet girl, they told me you were dead. They had found blood and something about a tape on the internet. Those bastards gave me a heart attack. I knew you weren't dead." That evening, I went to stay with her, just to reassure her that I was still physically present and to just hug her. Mainly to reassure myself that I was definitely still present in this world. Deep down, I knew what this was about. Of course, someone who wasn't a degenerate monster was going to watch my movies and try to put a name on the woman who should be somewhere in a shallow grave. But I always thought people would think the movies were just great fakes because you can only be the star of one Snuff movie, not 50. A few weeks had passed, and apart from my losing a year or two off of her life, things had settled down. I had decided to quit. It was never going to be a long-term thing. But if I was going to stop, my final movie was going to be my best. I wanted to go out with a bang, as they say. It was the day of the shoot, and on my way to the location, I couldn't escape the feeling I was being watched. I put it down to my nerves, because I was going to die in the most brutal way possible. It was going to be so bad that no one was ever going to think it was faked. And the fact it was going to be the last video of me made it sound all the more believable. I knew it was going to be painful, but the pain never lasted, and all I was thinking was, it's going to be a spectacular death. And it was. But as the euphoria swept over me and I began to slip into the darkness, I watched as men in SWAT gear burst into the room, followed by men in suits. As always, I came back to life with a big gasp of air, like a baby taking its first breath after being expelled from the womb. I was expecting to be in the room where I was murdered, but this time I found myself on a cold metal slab. As I looked around what looked like an operating room, I saw two men in suits. One was smiling, while the other appeared to hand over money from his wallet. "Hey there, welcome back. I just bet my colleague here $50 that you would come back from the dead," he said as he put the note in his top pocket. "And I must say, I am a big fan of your movies. Damsel in the Dungeon is my personal favorite," said the smartly dressed man as he smiled down at me. Now this was the first time I had ever felt like I was in real danger. A sudden panic washed over me as I tried to get up off the table. The two men in suits smiled at each other before handing me a hospital gown. Where am I?" I asked. "Oh, you have nothing to worry about. It's not like we're gonna kill you," said one of the men as they burst out laughing. The two men then walked me to an interview room and sat me down at a table opposite them. "Well, you still haven't told me who you are and my reasons for being here." The two men then adjusted themselves into a more serious posture. "Oh, well, I'm sorry for the confusion, honey. My name is Agent Harris, and my colleague here is Agent Butler." I look across at the two young agents sitting across from me as their frozen expressions fixate on me. "Agents, huh? Are you guys FBI or something?" I nervously asked. One of the agents gave a disgruntled laugh as if I offended him. "Well, it's close, but we're with the CIA." "The CIA? Well, what do you want with me? I didn't know dying was illegal." The two men then sat upright as one of them put a picture of a woman in front of me. "We need your help with a delicate situation. It's of the utmost importance to the security of this country." I looked down at the picture of a woman who looked strangely enough like me. Apart from her expensive-looking attire and different colored hair, we had the same facial features and we looked to be the same height. The woman in the picture is the wife of the Russian Minister for Defense, Sergei Shoigu, said the agent with a sound of urgency in his voice. Okay, well, what does this have to do with me? Well, she has a lot of secrets that could be very important to us. The problem is, her husband isn't a very nice man. And fortunately for us, he treats her like a dog. So she wants a way out of the marriage, but being the man he is, he's not going to let her go easily. Right, well, that sounds like their problem. I still don't know what this has to do with me. The two agents look at each other before fixating their stares at me again. Sergei is very powerful. Even if we get her out of the country, we couldn't guarantee her safety. The only way we could do that is if we faked her death. But it has to look convincing, and that is where you come in. All of a sudden, this made sense to me. I remembered a guy friend of mine who was big into conspiracy theories and would always bang on about how the moon landings were faked in a studio. Okay, so, would I be correct in thinking you want me to make another movie, given my special talents? The two agents looked at each other again, but this time with a smile. She catches on quick, doesn't she? I think I'm beginning to like her more already. I picked up the picture again and stared at the woman looking back at me, with pain in her eyes and a painted-on smile. All right. How much does the gig pay? I was married to my wife for 17 years, and never once had she turned to me and told me that she loved me. For 10 of the 17 years, the marriage had been sexless. This wasn't on the part of my wife. She always had a high libido, whereas mine has always been low. I guess we just wanted different things when it came to sex. To be fair, we were two very different people when we met. They say opposites attract, and at the time I felt lucky to have found her. She worked as a psychologist and taught at a very prestigious university. I owned a small building company, and we met when I was contracted to do work in the building where she taught. The marriage wasn't always bad. At the start, she was amazing and tried hard to make it work. But it didn't take long for the differences between us to become a barrier. The last 3 years have been the hardest. The constant arguing meant we no longer shared a bed together. Whenever we do manage to be in the room together, the air is thick with a tension that is pressed down on every breath, filling the room with an unspoken weight. It had reached a point where the love I craved was no longer just a longing, but a gnawing hunger. When I first hired a sex worker, it started as a way to just feel the warmth of a woman. I wanted to feel like I was wanted and loved, even if it was a hollow performance. The first couple times it was nice and passionate, but it wasn't the sex I was missing. On the third time, I made it clear I didn't want sex at all. I just wanted someone to hold, and to hold me. It felt great, but it was still missing the emotional aspect, and that's when I came up with the idea for the flashcards. I hired the same sex worker every time. Gemma was considerably younger than me. She was the same age my wife was when we first met. Apart from age, the only thing that resembled my wife was the color of her eyes. By our fourth encounter, Gemma knew what I was after, so when I pulled out the flashcards, she was happy to go along with it. They would read, "You make me feel safe. Hold me tightly and don't let go. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. I love you so much." Gemma was perfect. I didn't need to prompt her, and she knew exactly when to read the cards back to me. Her touch was warm and gentle, as if she could sense my loneliness. With each encounter, I felt more alive, as if she were breathing color back into my gray existence. My encounters with Gemma went from once a month to a couple nights a week. My need for love and validation became like a drug. I was hooked. The withdrawal was unbearable and left me feeling empty, like I had a dark void in my soul. There was a change in me that didn't go unnoticed by my wife either. I started dressing differently. There was what you could call a pep in my step. especially around her. I won't lie, it started having a strange effect on my relationship with her as well. She was easier to be around, but I did suspect that she knew something was going on. The motel where Gemma and I met was a little nicer than the usual sleaziness and despair of a roadside motel. It wasn't 5 stars, but it did offer a certain discreetness. When the door opened, I was taken aback. Gemma stood before me, but it felt as if my wife had stepped into the room. She wore the same soft blue dress that my wife loved, its fabric hugging her figure, and her hair was styled in the same way, long and cascading with those effortless waves. Even her eyes seemed to shine with that familiar sparkle. As she stepped inside, I noticed how she embodied my wife's mannerisms perfectly. The way she tilted her head when listening, the gentle laugh and the soft way she held her hands. It felt surreal, a haunting echo of my wife. I was torn between pleasure and a disquieting sense of unease. Was I still with Gemma? Or had I somehow crossed a line into a disturbing fantasy? Gemma's uncanny resemblance to my wife sent a chill down my spine. The same blue dress, the exact haircut, and her mannerisms mirrored my wife so perfectly that it felt like a cruel joke. "How did you know to dress like this?" I asked. She smiled, tilting her head just like my wife. "I thought you'd like it. Don't you remember how much she loved this dress?" I could feel a knot twist in my stomach at that moment. Was this a coincidence, or had she been watching us? I wasn't sure what to think, and I couldn't, in good faith, continue this charade. "I need to go," I said as I quickly left. That evening, a fragile tension hung in the air as my wife and I sat across from each other at the dining table. She glanced up, her blue eyes searching mine, and for the first time in ages, I felt a flicker of something I thought I had lost. "I've missed you," she said softly. "Really?" This was the first time in 10 years I heard even a hint of empathy from her mouth. She nodded as the tension in her shoulders slightly eased before she reached across the table and gently brushed my fingers. As we moved to the bedroom, an unfamiliar warmth washed over us as our barriers slowly crumbled. "Let's forget everything for a moment," she said. That night, she gave me everything I had longed for in our relationship. For the first time, I felt the affection I craved. As we laid there in the sweaty aftermath, I reveled in the closeness. But that was quickly shattered when my wife started echoing the same phrases from the flashcards I had Gemma recite. I laid there, stunned, as her words echoed in the darkness. "You make me feel safe," she whispered. How could she know those words? My mind raced as I pulled slightly away, the intimacy suddenly replaced by a chilling unease. I shrugged off the previous night as a strange coincidence, convincing myself that I was overthinking things. My wife had simply said the right things at the right time, and nothing more. The next evening, I decided to sleep in the spare bedroom. Sometime during the night, I was jolted from my sleep. As I opened my eyes, I froze. Gemma was lying beside me, with her arms wrapped around me. A chilling feeling of dread crept up my spine as I looked around the room. All the flashcards I had made for our encounters were now nailed to the walls of the room. "You make me feel safe," she whispered, repeating each phrase like a ritual, her voice eerily soft. I couldn't handle it anymore. The flashcards, the strange way my wife had been acting, the eerie resemblance Gemma had started to take on. Everything felt like it was closing in on me. I needed space. I needed to breathe. So I went to the motel. The same place where I had met Gemma before, back when things were simpler, back when I thought I had some control over my life. I'd barely settled in when I heard a knock on the door. My heart stopped. I wasn't expecting anyone. Reluctantly, I opened the door, and there she was, Gemma. But something was off. She looked exactly like my wife again, but this time, no warmth. Her eyes were cold. Just like the way my wife used to look at me when we argued. "You need this," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "Gemma, why are you doing this?" She stepped inside, not waiting for an invitation. "Gemma? Is that what you call me now, you pathetic little man?" The words hit me like a punch to the gut. That's exactly how my wife used to talk to me in our worst moments. You think paying for affection makes you a man? You think a few nice words on flashcards are enough to fix your sad, broken life? She said in a cold, unrelenting tone. "Stop," I said, shaking. She ignored me, walking further into the room. "You've always been weak. That's why she can't love you. You disgust her." "Shut the fuck up," I shouted. "You're worthless. You were never enough for her, and you'll never be enough for anyone." I snapped. The words, the look in her eyes, the way she embodied everything my wife had said and done to break me over the years. It was too much. I lunged at her, shoving her hard. I didn't mean to hurt her. I just wanted her to stop. But she stumbled back, tripping over the edge of the coffee table. Her body crashed through the glass as I stood there, frozen in horror as she lay motionless on the floor with blood pooling around her. What have I done? I thought to myself. I rushed over to her, but she wasn't moving. The blood was everywhere, glistening under the motel lights. I didn't know what to do. My mind was spinning out of control. In a haze, I dragged her into the bathroom, laying her body in the tub. My hands were shaking as I wiped the sweat from my forehead. For a moment, I thought about walking away and leaving her for the cleaning staff to find. I couldn't think straight. I couldn't focus. I knew I needed help, so I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. There's been an accident. Someone's hurt," I said into the phone. The police arrived quickly, faster than I expected. I led them to the bathroom, trying to calm myself. I was shaking as I opened the door to show them the body, my mind already running through every possible scenario. But when I pulled back the shower curtain, there was no blood. Instead, lying in the tub, was a mannequin, with its glassy eyes staring up at me, its limbs twisted and stiff. My stomach dropped. Pinned to its chest and limbs were all the flashcards I had given Gemma. "You make me feel safe. I love you. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me." The officers looked at me, confused, but I couldn't say anything. I couldn't explain it. The room spun as I sank to the floor, gasping for breath. Had I imagined everything? Or had it all been part of some twisted game? As I slumped against the wall, catching my breath, my vision blurred with panic and exhaustion, I noticed one of the flashcards pinned to the mannequin wasn't like the others. The handwriting was different, sharper, and more deliberate. My stomach nodded as I read the words. "Smile, I'm watching you. Your loving wife." Ice then ran through my veins. My gaze darted around the room. I hadn't noticed before, but tucked discreetly in the upper corners of the bathroom were tiny, blinking red lights. I rushed back into the main room, scanning it frantically. Sure enough, there were more cameras behind the mirror. Another disguised as part of the smoke alarm. I felt sick. She had been watching me here, in this very motel room. She saw everything. Every intimate moment, every breakdown, every twisted encounter with Gemma. How long has this been going on? My chest pounded with fury. I had to confront her. This thing that she'd orchestrated wasn't just about our marriage. It was something far, far darker. I drove to her work, my hands gripping the steering wheel. When I arrived at the university, I stormed into the building where she taught, not caring about the stares or whispers as I pushed my way toward the lecture hall. My heart pounded louder with each step. I couldn't think straight. I couldn't focus on anything except getting to her. I flung open the doors to her lecture room. The room was full of students, all women, and there, front and center, sitting with perfect posture, was Gemma. But she wasn't just any student. She was sitting at the front like a prized pupil, fully engrossed in what was happening on the projector screen. It took me a moment to register what I was seeing. On the screen were videos of me, of us. Every humiliating, intimate moment of our marriage playing out on the screen. My heart sank as I saw flashes of our arguments, the loveless years, and then the nights I'd spent with Gemma. My wife stood at the front of the room, dressed impeccably as always, her cold eyes gleaming with satisfaction. She paused the video and turned to face me with a smile that sent chills down my spine. The entire class turned to stare at me as well. "Welcome, darling," she said. "I didn't expect you so soon, but it's a perfect time for a demonstration." "What the fuck is this?" I growled. She gestured to the screen casually, like she was explaining a case study. "This, my dear, is the culmination of years of work. A deep dive into the male psyche, specifically the fragile male ego and toxic masculinity." She smiled, but there was no warmth in it, only malice. "And you, my love, have been the perfect subject." The room was filled with murmurs of agreement from the students. Some took notes. Gemma's eyes locked onto mine, but they were no longer soft or inviting. They were cold, complicit in this twisted charade. "You set this all up? The cameras, the flashcards, Gemma?" My wife tilted her head, her smile widening. "Of course. Every part of your life, your marriage, your infidelity. I curated it all. I needed to break you down, to strip away every false layer of self-worth, until only the truth remained. That's what this experiment is about. What better way to understand a man's breaking point than to use his own desires against him?" I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. "This is sick." I cried. I felt like I was going to collapse. Every intimate detail of my life had been exposed, dissected, and turned into a study. Every word, every flashcard, every moment of my desperation. It had all been for her amusement, for her research. The students were all watching, some amused, some intrigued, and others looking at me like I was nothing more than a pathetic creature beneath their feet. I couldn't breathe. My world as I knew it had shattered. My wife wasn't my partner. She had been my tormentor, my puppeteer, and I had danced right into her hands. Everything I thought I controlled had been orchestrated by her in the most cruel, calculated way. "You're a monster," I whispered, my voice trembling. My wife smiled and widened. "Oh no, darling. No. I'm a scientist." I love having sex. I know that's a taboo thing to say as a woman, but I'm not ashamed to admit it. We all love it, don't we? So why hide that fact and pretend that we don't? It's raw, it's violent. It's who we are. It's the pinnacle of human intimacy, a universal love language. One might even say it's the ultimate display of love and passion. Virtue signalers might shriek and cry, pointing fingers at me and calling me names in their spiteful outrage. Trust me, I've heard the worst of it. That I'm a slut, pervert, heathen. They all follow the same script. It's all bullshit, of course. And you and I know that, don't we? We both know such people are insecure, and rather than address their own frustration, they choose to project their issues onto others. I obviously am not one such person. Hookup culture has made it easier to get laid than ever before. Chivalry has collapsed, giving way to something fresh, something new. One-night stands are now easily accessible to practically anyone who desires them. Go out to any bar, any club, and walk up to any guy. Give them a little sweet talk and bet your eyes at them, and they'll be infatuated with you in no time. Such a thing is so easy that picking up men has essentially become my craft at this point. Don't mistake me for some sex-obsessed broad, though. I seek out men for a purpose. I want to find the one for me. The man with the perfect body who can satisfy my every need whenever I want him to. It's like I said earlier. It's the ultimate display of love and passion, but without the ideal person by your side, it's a waste. Luckily for me, I happened to find such a man a couple nights ago. He honestly looked out of place when I first saw him, in that rowdy bar where drunken men clumsily stumbled about, noisily talking amongst one another. He sat alone, silent. He was dressed much too well for such a place. He sported black jeans and wore a clean blue buttoned-up shirt. His lips stayed glued to a brown beer bottle which he'd occasionally sip from. Honestly, he was kind of cute. I rose from my chair and sat beside him. He glanced towards me, not so subtly peeking at my breasts before looking into my eyes. "So, what's a guy like you doing in this place?" I asked while resting my chin on my hand. He fully turned his body to face me and briefly adjusted his glasses before responding. I'm just having a drink. What's a girl like you doing out here?" he croaked, his voice trailing off towards the end. I flashed him a smile, hoping my friendly appearance would calm his nerves. "Oh, I'm just out here having a couple of drinks after a long day. Nothing much besides that. But then I saw how cute you were and thought I'd come talk to you," I said, giggling slightly and tilting my head. His cheeks grew red as a cherry. He was likely surprised by how direct I had been. Thanks," he replied sheepishly, seemingly at a loss for words. "So, are you going to get me something to drink then?" I exclaimed, hoping he would eventually find his momentum and better engage in our discussion. "Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, for sure," he uttered, waving the bartender towards us. When the bartender brought me my drink, we clinked our glasses together and took a swig. A few bottles later, the man eased up a little and he finally got a little more comfortable with me. "So, what's your name, honey?" he asked, a smirk painted across his drunken face. "My name? Well, it took you long enough to ask, didn't it? You're lucky you're so attractive, or I might have up and left already. But if you must know, it's Samantha. What's your name, tough guy?" "It's Matthew." I could smell the booze in his breath. The guy was absolutely shit-faced. I, on the other hand, was still mostly sober. I'd built up quite an alcohol tolerance. Besides, I wasn't drinking anything too strong. I leaned into his shoulder, positioning my rosy lips right into the front of his ear before whispering to him, "Why don't I take you back to my place, Matt?" His eyes lit up with excitement as he rocketed out of his chair before promptly stumbling and collapsing onto me. I struggled to keep him standing upright. He wrapped his arm around my shoulder and stumbled along, and we exited the bar together. When we finally got to my apartment room, I opened the door and laid him down on my bed. I gently rested my hand on his head, massaging his scalp, which was covered with messy black curls. He was far too intoxicated to speak coherently. His quivering lips only produced nonsensical gibberish. I ran my fingers along his face, adoring the handsome man laying right there on my bed. His head must have been pounding heavily, so I made sure to grab a cup from the kitchen and filled it with water. I helped him consume the liquid before setting the cup back on the counter next to the capsule I kept in my possession. Its contents would help Matt relax, and that I was certain of. Once I made my way back to the bed, I crawled onto the mattress and sat down on his legs. I grabbed his wrists and positioned them straight above his head. Then I pulled off his shirt, revealing his well-built arms and torso. I licked my lips, a sense of raw lust beginning to flow throughout my body. I bent down and kissed him, before slowly tracing my fingers along his abdomen. Matthew softly muttered something in protest, but I paid him no mind. I knew he wanted this. Every man wants this. It's why they go out to bars. It's why they go out to clubs. They do it to achieve the ultimate prize. He grunted again, and I delicately placed my finger over his lip. His cloudy eyes rolled into his skull as he looked up. I hung my head back, panting, before rolling off of him and laying by his side. I turned to face him. He barely clung to consciousness, but I didn't need him to be awake. I didn't need him to be aware to satisfy me. As I laid in bed, I couldn't keep my mind still. I knew that Matt had to be mine tonight. A smile spread across my face as the realization set in. I got up and approached my closet. It was finally time. Opening it, I was faced with large metal objects which gleamed in the moonlight that seeped through my velvet curtains. I had finally found the one, and it was time to do something. Something I had always wanted to do. Something that would allow me to be with him forever. Matthew has since lived in my apartment with me. We've been so happy together, so happy. No longer do I go out in search of a partner. I have one now. One that will stick with me for life. One who can never leave me. One who can never escape the cycle of lust which we find ourselves in, just as it should be, just as it was meant to be. Sometimes the neighbors knock on my door, asking me if everything is okay. At times their ears perk up when they hear things. It's not an issue though, really. I just explain that I have a man living with me now, and they understand. They know how men can be, after all. Tonight was fantastic. I never get tired of this, and I never will. Don't read into this as if I'm using him though. Believe me, I'm not. I kiss all over him. I even kiss on the blood-stained stumps where his arms and legs used to be. As I look upon his face, his wonderful mouth, where a streak of spittle leaks out from, and his beautiful glossy drugged-up eyes, I smile in utter satisfaction before laying my head down on his chest to listen to his still beating heart. There is no end to my hunger. There is no end to my night. Lately, I've been waking up still exhausted. Even when I went to bed early, I'd wake up feeling like I haven't slept in days. Trying to get out of bed for work was almost impossible, which was strange for me because I was always a high-energy sort of person. A few hours of sleep and I was always good to go. I was at a loss as to what was happening. After a barrage of tests, even my doctor couldn't find anything wrong with me. The only recent change in my life was my boyfriend who had moved in, and I was sharing a bed for the first time. Stephen was the first love of my life, and this was my first serious relationship. I didn't want to spoil things by making him sleep in the spare room. I liked having Stephen around. He made a real fuss over me, and he would bring me chamomile tea every night before bed. The pain in my hip was sharp and pulsated up the right side of my body. I jumped from my bed and nearly collapsed to the floor as I struggled to get to the bathroom. "Stephen, can you come in here?" I cried. A big dark bruise covered my hip, as if I was assaulted in my sleep with a metal bar. "What's wrong?" Stephen said as he came rushing into the bathroom. Did I fall out of bed or something? He had a weird expression on his face, and I could swear he looked guilty about something. Probably. I don't know." His response was dismissive, which sent my brain spiraling with all sorts of thoughts. "This is not normal, Stephen. I think there's something wrong with me." "Well, you should probably go see a doctor then," he said coldly before quickly leaving the room. My doctor was still at a loss and suggested I should see someone who could rule out anything nefarious. Stephen was still dismissive of me as we drove to the hospital. "I'm sure it's nothing. You're probably just stressed from work." People don't wake up with bruises over stress, I angrily thought to myself. The doctor at the hospital took my blood and did all sorts of tests on me, including a stress test. I should have been happy when the test came back clear, but it only made me feel like I was losing my mind. Something was definitely wrong with me. "I would prescribe you sedatives, but your blood work shows you are already on nitrazepam," explained the doctor. I was dumbstruck and wasn't sure what the doctor was talking about. "I'm not sure what you're talking about, because I've never taken so much as a painkiller in my entire life." The doctor's face looked how I felt. He took out his charts and looked over them again. No, you definitely tested positive for it. It's a powerful sedative. Later that evening, as I sat in bed, a million different thoughts ran through my mind. How was that even possible? I thought to myself. As I sat there, Stephen walked in with my chamomile tea, and just as I was about to put my lips to it, I was struck by the most unnerving thought. The realization that my boyfriend was drugging me, and filled me with a dread I had never felt before. I emptied the contents of the cup down the sink in the bathroom before jumping back into bed. "Was it hot enough for you?" asked Stephen as he jumped in beside me. "Oh yes, perfect as always." I felt as if I was lying beside a complete stranger now. Had I ever really known him, I thought to myself, as I lay there terrified he was doing unimaginable things to me while I slept. I must have drifted off at some point, because when I woke up, the room was a mess, and Stephen was nowhere to be seen. My body ached all over, and it felt like I was in a fight. What the hell was he doing to me in my sleep, I thought. I had made the decision to go to the police, but I needed evidence, or it was just my word against his. I had purchased a hidden camera and set it up in the bedroom, pointing it towards the bed. I woke up exhausted as usual, which unfortunately meant you had done something to me while I slept, but I had it on camera. I opened my laptop to check the footage. For the first couple of hours of sleep, nothing happened. For a moment, I had hoped I was imagining everything until I watched myself jolt from the bed. At first, I couldn't believe what I was doing. It felt like I was watching a horror movie. As I watched myself crawl up the bedroom wall like some kind of possessed demon. I continued to crawl up the wall onto the ceiling, looking over Stephen like I was ready to pounce on him. He awoke, and it was strange watching him because it was like he was prepared for what was happening and didn't seem fazed by it. He took a stick out from under the bed as I pounced from the ceiling above, and he spent the next hour fighting me off. I watched as he subdued me on the bed before pulling out handcuffs and cuffing me to the bed. I looked at the marks on my wrists, which made sense now. As soon as Stephen came home from work, I ran and threw my arms around him. "Why didn't you tell me what you were going through every night?" He shrugged his shoulders. "I thought you knew, and usually the drugs I was giving you made things a little easier." "What? Why are you even still with me?" "You? My last girlfriend was a jealous psychopath. This is nothing compared to her."